전진! 막아진다! 알겠다! 연막 조심해! 확인!
This story is a work of fiction, reconstructed into a novel format, based on the factual background of a real factory fire in Wonju, Gangwon, with the addition of the author's creative imagination. 1. Parched earth, the scream of twisted steel. The winter in Munmak-yub, Wonju, Gangwon, was cruelly dry. A days-long dry weather warning had sapped the last bit of moisture from the ground, and the biting wind whipping through the industrial complex rattled window frames with a sharp metallic screech. 32-year-old Junho stood before a massive textile loom, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes were bloodshot, and his shoulders felt heavy, as lead from several consecutive nights of overtime. To him, the factory was both his livelihood and an inescapable prison. For Junho, a young head of the household responsible for his sick mother's medical bills and his siblings' tuition rest, was nothing more than a luxury. Just a little more. Once I finish this batch, I can rest for a few days, Junho muttered in a cracked voice, inspecting the machine. The old machine was vibrating with an unusually ominous shudder today. Tangled threads inside were obstructing the flow, making a grinding sound that resembled the growl of a hungry beast. Junho reached into a gap in the machine with practiced instinct. In that split second, the aging control unit suffered a fatal malfunction. With a bone-chilling crunch, the heavy steel gears caught the tip of Junho's glove. Ah! Before a scream could even escape his throat, his right hand was sucked into the gears. The dull sensation of crushing bone and tearing. Tendons struck his brain with the force of a hammer. The steel was merciless. Flesh was mangled, and hot blood poured onto the heated metal. The machine didn't stop, pulling his arm deeper. Junho fought back, pushing against the machine with his remaining left hand. But the interlocked gears seemed to have made his body a part of the hardware. To make matters desperate, a spark flew from an old electrical panel in the corner. The dry air, dust clumps, and flammable textile scraps on the floor devoured the spark instantly. The flames climbed the pillars and engulfed the ceiling in seconds. He heard the urgent screams of colleagues fleeing, but Junho could only face the approaching heat of death, staring at his shattered arm. 2. The black veil and burning lungs. A minute and a second, swallowed by hell. Feeding on the fabric and accumulated grease, the fire turned the factory into a living hell of screams and chaos. The crimson flames licked the ceiling like a monster's tongue and melted. Ceiling materials dripped like sticky tar. Junho's skin was literally cooking. Initially, a sharp pain like thousands of needles piercing him at once surged through his body soon. Blisters began to swell as the heat reached deeper layers. Eventually, the high heat reached the nerves, burning away the system that transmits pain, and a bizarre, silent stillness settled over his body. The smell of burning flesh and oil from his trapped arm filled the air, and his screams turned into a coarse metallic rasp from a shredded throat. Tiny particles in the air exploded repeatedly upon contact with the flames, mercilessly slashing his face. Black smoke swirled against the ceiling, like a massive wave, and settled toward the ground. It wasn't just smoke, it was a wall of carbon, monoxide and lethal gases, sticky black soot from burning oil and the stench of melting nylon. Visibility was cut to zero in a single second, plunging Junho into a pitch-black darkness where he couldn't see the machine right in front of him. The smoke clung to his eyes and nose like a liquid. The more he tried to open them, the more the hot dust particles scratched. His eyeballs and his tears dried instantly in the heat, leaving only a searing agony. The oxygen concentration dropped to unsurvivable levels as the flames breathed greedily. In its place, toxic carbon dioxide took over. Each breath felt like a red-hot iron rod being plunged deep into his throat, tearing his lungs apart. What went down his windpipe wasn't life-sustaining air, but fire-heated dust like microscopic blades. His pulmonary alveoli, filled with soot, refused to accept. Oxygen and deathly gases began to suffocate his brain cells one by one. Save, please. Junho's lips cracked and bled from the heat, and even that blood solidified. His desperate plea was buried under the roar of the fire and the thunderous groans of the building twisting in the heat. The factory was now no different from a giant kiln. Molten plastic from the ceiling fell onto his work clothes, fusing with his flesh. He instinctively tried to cover his face with his left hand, but even that hand hissed as it touched the heated machine, turning white from the burn. His chest swelled to the bursting point. His diaphragm shivered violently, craving oxygen, but only death-bringing smoke entered. Junho flailed his hand in the air, like a diver who had lost his tank in the deep sea. But all his fingertips caught was the dry, heavy heat that felt like it would melt them off. He felt his heartbeat thumping in his head like a giant drum. Thump, thump, thump. The beats grew slower, and the gaps between them were filled by the shadow of death as the blood to his brain became contaminated. Paradoxically, the terror began to transform into a dreamlike tranquility. This was the sensory numbness and false peace caused by hypoxia before death. His consciousness scattered like cotton, candy, and strange illusions flickered before his eyes. Beyond the black smoke, he saw the white steam of the kimchi stew his mother used to cook. It wasn't the harsh red of the flames, but a very cozy, clean white. Junho, rest now. You've worked so hard. His mother's voice hovered in his ears like a hallucination. The green fields of Wonju Stream, where he used to play with his sibling, shimmered in the fire, and there was no longer a pungent smell or a cold steel machine crushing his arm. The toxic gas in his lungs finally put his brain to sleep, and Junho could no longer feel the pain of his body. Between the cold steel and the hot flames, he slowly let go of the thread of consciousness and sank deep, very deep, into the endless heavy abyss of darkness. The factory continued its feast of fire, having completely swallowed the life of a young man named Junho. 3. Floating soul, walking above the flames, a sad spirit as an observer. At the moment the suffocating pain was most intense, all physical sensations suddenly dissolved into silence. After passing through a tunnel of darkness that felt like an eternity, Junho opened his eyes again, feeling a strange sense of liberation, as if he were thrown alone into a vacuum of space. But what he faced was not reality. He was no longer lying on the burning floor, crushed by hot smoke. Junho's spirit was floating in the air near the factory ceiling. where black smoke snaked across the rafters and heat swirled like a vortex. It was a projection of his soul from his body. It was the moment the spirit shed its skin and the gates of the narrow, painful prison of the flesh opened. Junho instinctively looked down and faced a sight too gruesome to behold. Amidst the piles of machinery being devoured by the hungry beast of fire, his own body lay limp and motionless, frozen in place. His right arm was still twisted at a grotesque angle, caught between the gears and the blood that had pooled around. It had dried into black stains from the heat. His face was covered in soot and blood, long since lost of its vitality. Black foam, the sign of death, clung to his lips, and the movement of his chest had cruelly stopped. As a spirit, Junho looked down at his own corpse with a detached feeling and a chilling sense of pity. Was that really me? Was my 32 years contained in such a small, shabby hide? His body lay discarded like a broken machine, part, and the spark of life that once burned within it seemed extinguished. To his soul, the heat of the fire and the acrid smoke were no longer felt. Instead, everything appeared as a flow of energy and light. The fire was not just a burning flame, but a living entity, spreading through electrical lines like veins. And the steel beams of the building were like the skeleton of a giant beast preparing to collapse. Junho could even feel the microscopic vibrations of smoke particles dancing in the air. His soul passed through the physical barrier of the walls as easily as turning a page, expanding his vision to the outside of the factory. The scene outside was a map of hellish chaos. All the vehicles from the Wonju fire station seemed to have arrived, their sirens tearing through the silence of the winter night. In the midst of dazzling red and blue flashing lights, dozens of fire trucks surrounded the burning factory, pouring massive streams of water. The colleagues who had barely escaped were sobbing, clutching the sleeves of the firefighters' gear. Junho felt a shiver as if their emotions were flowing directly into his heart. Junho is still in there. He's so young. He went in to fix the machine and couldn't get out. He's a good kid. How can this happen? Please, please save him. Mr. Kim, usually the most blunt and irritable man at the factory, was slumped on the cold dirt ground. He was wailing, scratching the earth until his fingernails cracked and bled. That cry wasn't just grief for a lost colleague. It was a scream, mixed with the guilt of not being able to protect a young man who was like a son to him. Junho approached him and whispered, "Mr. Kim, I'm here. I'm okay. It's not hot anymore. So please don't cry." He reached out a hand, but his transparent fingers passed right through Mr. Kim's shoulder and scattered into the air. An extreme loneliness, the realization that his existence could no longer reach. Others overwhelmed Junho. His soul drifted between those fighting to hold on to the last thread of life and his own body that had already let go, sinking deep into a wave of unnameable sadness and eerie peace. 4. Pioneer of the Deadlock, Rookie Jihun's Terror and Resolve. Rescue Team 1, Jihun, entering. Oxygen tank at 150, all clear. Carrying over 20 kilo of heavy air tanks and rescue equipment, rookie firefighter Jihun took his first step into the wall of black smoke. The cold winter air at the entrance was instantly cut off, and an agonizing heat pressed against his entire body through his firesuit. Inside his face shield, Jihun's heavy breathing mixed with the mechanical sound of the air tank, creating a bizarre rhythm. Hiss, hiss, every time he realized his life depended on this single, narrow hose. His heart pounded as if to break his ribs. This was nothing like the smoke drills at the training center. This was real, and the flames swirling before him glared at him, like a roaring beast. Jihun's vision was nothingness, deeper than mere darkness. Even the powerful beam of his flashlight couldn't penetrate more than a few inches through the sticky smoke particles. He entrusted his fate to his left hand, feeling the wall and the flickering screen of the thermal camera in his right. Stay calm. The seniors are behind me. I can do this. His mouth was so dry his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, but he didn't stop. Melted building materials dripped onto his helmet with a thud, and the pungent smell of his gear's outer layer scorching hit his nose. Then it happened. With a thunderous crash, a massive steel vent fell from the ceiling. The falling object, missing Jihun's feet by just a few centimeters, hit the pile of fabric on the floor, and the impact sent flames rolling over his head. Jihun instinctively lowered his body and crawled. The hot air rose, and what little breathable air there was remained close to the floor. Every time his gloved hand touched the heated concrete, he wanted to scream, but he gritted his teeth. Then, through the red and yellow signals of the thermal camera, an anomalous shape emitting a blue light colder than its surroundings appeared. A cold object in contrast to the high heat around it. It was the body of a person losing vitality as their temperature dropped. Survivor found. 2 o'clock trapped in a large loom. Unconscious. Requesting backup. Jihun shouted into his radio as if screaming, rushing toward Junho. But the reality Jihun faced was pure horror. Junho's right arm was rolled into the giant steel gears like laundry, and the heat-swelled machine parts seemed more firmly locked, threatening to crush his flesh further. Jihun brought over the hydraulic spreader with trembling hands, but the space was too narrow to save Junho, who was wedged between the machine and the wall. They either had to lift the whole machine or cut the shaft. But it was too much for a rookie's clumsy skill. Please, just let go. A man is dying here. Jihun desperately operated the lever, but the heat-warped steel didn't budge, as if mocking him. At that moment, sweat poured into Jihun's helmet, like rain, blurring his vision. The low oxygen warning began to blink. Beep, beep. The warning sounded like a countdown to death. A flash of terror crossed his mind. If I stay like this, I might end up buried here like this man. His survival instinct pulled at his heels. His parents' faces waiting at home. His own smiling face when he vowed to become a firefighter. They flashed like lightning. He took a step back, but in that split second, he saw Junho's pale, soot-covered face. Through Junho's closed eyelids, he saw a trace of a tear that hadn't dried. It looked as if he were clinging to him, pleading not to be abandoned, just one more try. Jihun felt his heart grow hot. What overwhelmed his fear wasn't a sense of duty or his training. It was a desperate sense of kinship, with the life fading before his eyes. I'm sorry for being a coward. I won't let go. My name is Jihun. Please, just hold on a little longer. Jihun rushed back to the machine and embraced the heated steel body with his whole being. Though he felt his gloves melting and the skin of his palms burning, Jihun tightly held Junho's cold left hand. I won't give up. It's not your time to die yet. Jihun's desperate and visceral cry pierced through the roar of the fire. In that moment, the coward Jihun was being reborn as a true savior in the heart of hell. 5. Screams of steel and the master's struggle. Taejin's extreme rescue. Jihun, snap out of it. Don't just stand there. Get back and secure the space! A heavy, sharp roar, sounding like it came from the edge of hell, hit Jihun's ears. It was the veteran rescue chief Taejin. He appeared, tearing through the curtain of black smoke, like it was a sheet of paper. His orange fire suit had already lost its original color, stained grey and black from hundreds of dangerous missions. Behind his shield, which was hideously melted from the heat, Taejin's gaze was not that of a terrified human, but cold and sharp like an experienced hunter tracking prey. Taejin analyzed the situation in a single second. The oxygen remaining on his helmet display, the metallic screams of the upper steel beams expanding in the heat, and Junho's mangled, pale body already crossing the limit of survival. He roughly grabbed Jihun's trembling shoulder and pushed him back. Jihun, you go to the patient's head right now. Secure the neck brace firmly and focus only on maintaining the airway. Don't think about anything else. Just do what I tell you. Understood? Taejin's voice was cool and resolute, as if it could freeze even the hundreds of degrees of heat. He slammed the massive 30-core engine-powered hydraulic cutter onto the floor. Vroom bang! The sound of the engine, starting, roared through the factory, facing the flames head-on. Taejin positioned the sharp steel blades of the cutter at the central shaft of the giant gears, crushing Junho's mangled arm, the hardest core connection point of the machine. Watching from above, Junho's soul held its breath. Thick veins stood out on Taejin's forearms like ropes, and the sweat seeping from his gloves evaporated into white steam as it touched the heated machine body. It was a noble yet desperate resistance of a human against the massive violence of the machine. Taejin gritted his teeth. Inside his helmet, a single will echoed like a scream. I must save him. All right, Jihun. When I say 3, you must pull the arm out as smoothly as possible, but without a single hesitation. If the angle is off even slightly, his arm will be severed right here. Remember what I said. 1, 2, 3. Taejin pulled the handle of the cutter with all his might. Krieg bang! The sound of steel being crushed and screamed shook the entire factory. The cutter unleashed tons of pressure, digging into the center of the gear, and bright sparks erupted like a volcanic explosion, slashing Taejin's fire suit. His whole body wavered from the immense recoil of the twisted steel, but his 2 feet remained unmoved, like a great tree rooted deep in the earth. His muscles expanded as if to burst, and his face inside. The helmet was hideously distorted from pain and concentration. Finally, with a chilling ping, the heavy steel gear shaft snapped in two. After a very long time, the machine finally let Junho go. But the joy was short-lived. Now, prepare for transport. Run! The moment Taejin finished his sentence, a massive echo rang from the factory ceiling. It was the sound of the main steel beams, exhausted and warped by the heat. Buckling under the weight, Jihun cradled Junho's bloody arm against his chest, like something precious. And Taejin immediately threw aside the heavy cutter and hoisted Junho's lower body. 10 seconds to the entrance. The ceiling is collapsing. Sprint! As they fled the scene with Junho, tons of heavy machinery and roof structures fell with a roar onto the spot where Junho had been lying just a second ago. K-boom! The ground shook, and massive sparks and debris flew in every direction. It was a life-or-death moment. Had they been even slightly later, all 3 would have been turned to ash. Taejin and Jihun sprinted toward the light of the entrance through the rain of sparks, at a speed beyond human limits. Their gear's outer layers were sticky with melted heat, and their lungs screamed from the burning air. But they didn't stop. As soon as they reached the entrance, Taejin placed Junho on a stretcher and slumped down, exhaling black soot. His hands were still vibrating slightly from the machine's tremors, but his eyes were already on Junho being moved to the ambulance. Live. Please live, you brat. The veteran firefighters' cracked prayers scattered into the cold, dawn air of Munmak. From behind Taejin's bowed back the man who had given his back to the flames to cradle another's life. Junho's soul felt a quiver in its entire being at the dignity of life and the deep reverence for humanity he had never felt while alive. 6. The symphony of the ambulance and the colleagues' screams. The moment Taejin and Jihun burst out of the factory entrance, which was collapsing as if hit by a bombardment, hundreds of gazes fixed on one spot. Outside was an extension of the hellish chaos. Beyond the yellow police tape, in the biting wind of Wonju, the factory workers who had been pacing in anxiety saw Junho's scorched form and, as if by agreement, collapsed into screams. Junho, Junhoya! No, not you. The cafeteria lady ran out without even wiping the flour from her apron and collapsed onto the cold asphalt, beating her chest. She remembered Junho smiling brightly just a few days ago, saying, "Ma'am, the braised mackerel is really delicious today," and she could barely breathe from sobbing. Beside her, his colleague, Mr. Kim, desperately pushed back people trying to block the firefighters, clearing a path. His eyes were bloodshot, and his lips were trembling with terror and grief. Oh, the heavens are heartless. What sin did that good boy commit? Junho, you have to live. What about your mother? If you go, please, open your eyes. Mr. Kim knelt on the cold ground and beat his head against the earth as the ambulance prepared to leave. Their wailing pierced through the thundering collapse of the fire site, circling Junho's stopped heart like a sharp blade. Junho's soul, floating in the sky, saw their distorted faces and every single hot tear rolling down their cheeks. Their prayers were not just wishes. They were like heavy golden chains of desperation, pulling Junho's soul back to the world of the living. The back doors of the ambulance slammed shut with a bang, and the narrow, enclosed space instantly transformed into a desperate battlefield for survival. Paramedic Minsek climbed onto Junho's thin chest and immediately began chest compressions without delay. Cardiac arrest confirmed. 30 compressions. Jihun, secure the airway and squeeze the BVM with everything you've got. 100% oxygen. Minsek's arms began a mechanical repetition that surpassed human limits. Every time a thump, thump, thump sounded inside the ambulance, a bizarre metallic sound mixed in as if Junho's ribs were screaming. Sweat poured from Minsek's forehead, dripping onto Junho's pale, burned chest. Minsek gritted his teeth. Years ago, that same suffocating helplessness and guilt of failing to save his own father in an ambulance, like this were whipping him forward. Please, just once. Breathe just once. You're still young. It's not fair to end it here. Minsek pressed down on Junho's stopped heart with all his body weight. His palms burned from the lingering heat of Junho's body, but he didn't even feel the pain. Charging 200 joules? Where? The chilling high-frequency sound of the machine gathering. Energy filled the ambulance. To Junho's soul, that sound felt like the final siren of the Grim Reaper, calling him, making his heart ache. Charge complete. Everyone clear. Shock. Zap! A powerful electric shock coursed through Junho's body. His body arched like a bow and fell back onto the bed. But the line on the EKG monitor remained a heartless flat line, emitting a bone-chilling beep. Minsek didn't stop. He gasped for air and continued the chest compressions. He's not back. Compress again. Jihun, keep the airway open. If we give up, he dies. I won't let him go. Minsek almost screamed into Junho's ear. His voice held not a command for a patient, but a desperate protest against death. Outside the ambulance, the sounds of colleagues running behind. and sobbing continued. God Buddha, please save our Junho. How many years has that boy spent covered in grease at the factory? Please show mercy just once. Mr. Kim stood at every turn toward the Wonju Severance Hospital emergency room, praying to the air with his hands clasped as the ambulance disappeared. Their earnest energy was now more than a prayer. It had become a massive wall of light enveloping the ambulance. The Junho in the sky felt the desperate vibration from Minsek's palms and the heart-wrenching wailing of his colleagues outside at the same time. Was I loved this much? I thought my life was just about enduring, but my death hurts him so much. Junho's soul felt a massive wave of emotion between the struggle inside, the ambulance and the mourning outside. At that moment, the white ceiling of the ambulance began to blur and become transparent, like ink dropped in water, and a dazzling white light from far above began to pull Junho's soul into a giant vortex. As Minsek's heavy breathing and Mr. Kim's desperate wailing grew distant like noise from a far-off place, Junho was pulled upward into a mysterious world where time and space stood still. 7. The Milky Way Corridor and the Mystery of Ara. The noise of the ambulance scattered like waves, and Junho opened his eyes with a bizarre sensation, as if he had woken up from a very long sleep. The first landscape he faced was a transcendental space that could not be defined by any earthly words. Beneath his feet, instead of a bottomless abyss, a massive milk way, as if all the stars in the night sky had been poured into it, flowed leisurely, like a river beneath a transparent glass floor. Every time Junho's foot touched that radiant river of starlight, a faint ring of light rippled out like a wave on a clear surface. The surroundings were submerged in a silence where even gravity could not be felt. The walls of the corridor, stretching infinitely, looked as if giant crystal shards were intertwined, and within them, earthly memories floated like white particles of snow. Junho realized he no longer felt the heat of the fire or the suffocation of the smoke, the pain crushing his arm, and the searing heat of his burned skin had become faint remnants, lighter than dust. He instinctively realized he had completely crossed the threshold of death. At the far end of the corridor, a woman with jet black hair flowing like a waterfall sat on a massive lapis lazuli throne. She was Ara, the manager of the Afterlife, who had watched over human life and death for tens of thousands of years. The fabric she wore was not mere cloth. It was as if the nebulae of the night sky had been moved onto it, and every time she moved, blue-violet light sparkled like waves, transmitting the pulse of the universe. Her eyes held the wisdom of billions of years and deep pity at the same time. And the moment her gaze met Junho's, he stopped breathing in overwhelming reverence, as if the very bottom of his soul were being peered through. Lee Junho of Wonju, Gangwon, you have found your way well to this cold corridor of the Milky Way through the pain of the hot flames. Era's voice did not come through her lips. It was a resonance echoing from the deepest part of Junho's heart, like a wind-carrying primordial peace. With a light snap of her fingers, the transparent walls of the corridor began to transform into giant mirrors one by one. And within those mirrors, the 32 years of Junho's life began to play out as a three-dimensional panorama. Junho stared blankly, pulled into the mirrors. The first scene he saw was his childhood, riddled with poverty. Instead of his sick father, young Junho was seen carrying loads heavier than himself in the market, his shoulders bent. When his friends wore the latest sneakers, the sight of the boy, walking with his head down in worn-out patched indoor shoes, was heart-wrenching. The screen quickly shifted to his youth, just after being thrilled by his university acceptance letter. Junho was seen throwing the letter into the furnace and sobbing silently all night to pay for his mother's eye surgery and his younger sister's tuition. The Junho in the mirror was always a being who sacrificed himself behind someone else, working night shifts between cold factory machines, then sitting in the corner of a cold convenience store to fill his stomach with a single cup of ramen. The young man who smiled faintly as he confirmed his hard-earned wages was sent immediately for his sister's tuition and his mother's medicine. Junho realized for the first time while watching himself in the mirror. That man named Lee Junho had never breathed for himself, not even once. His life was an altar for others, and he was the sacrifice laid upon it. Look, Junho, the word I is nowhere to be found in your life. You didn't even know your shoulders were mangled from carrying others' burdens, nor that your eyes were going blind from wiping others' tears. Have you ever once enjoyed a new set of clothes, or a warm bowl of rice solely for yourself? Ara's question pierced Junho's spirit like a sharp ice pick. Looking at himself in the mirror, smiling vacantly while wiping grease in his old work. Clothes. He felt a pain in his heart, as if it were being torn. If a soul could have tears, they would have filled this Milky Way by now. It was the misery of realizing that what was called a holy sacrifice was actually a cruel abuse and neglect of himself. Junho watched as his memories turned into stardust and scattered along the glass walls, feeling an indescribable sadness and pity for the self he had never once truly embraced. Ara rose from her throne and approached Junho. Every time her step touched the Milky Way, a clear and resonant bell sound echoed through the space. She pointed to Junho's transparent chest. There, a hollow hole deeper than any earthly pain, possessed only by those who failed to love themselves, was gapping. Here, at the boundary of the afterlife, Junho was finally facing his own existence head-on. 8. The scales of judgment and the echo of the soul. The sin and opportunity of not loving oneself. Ara waved her hand lightly toward the void. Dazzling golden particles gathered in the center of the silent corridor, forming a massive golden scale. This scale was not made of earthly metal. The scales of karma, which weigh the soul, emitted a merciful light or a chilling pressure depending on the observer's state of mind. Ara opened the record of the afterlife. From its pages, fragments of the merit Junho had accumulated throughout his life rose like living butterflies and began to settle one by one on the left plate of the scale. They were tiny, dazzling moments in the corners of his life that Junho himself hadn't even considered good deeds. This is the memory of a winter night when you were 22. On your way home, you gave your evening sausage from your lunchbox to a stray dog, shivering in the scrap pile behind the factory. A warm orange bead fell onto the scale with Ara's explanation. In the vision, Junho was hungry himself, but he couldn't ignore the dog's wet eyes saying, "You're alone like me, eat up," with a smile. "This is from last summer. You spent the night fixing the mistake of a rookie who had ruined expensive fabric due to clumsy machine operation and was being scolded by the manager. The next day, you just patted his shoulder, saying, 'It's always like that at first,' as if nothing had happened. This time, a clear blue bead was placed on the scale. And this is the sincerity of your planting flower seeds under the old wall of your hometown house every month, hoping your blind mother could feel the spring through the scent alone. As the fragments of small but pure good deeds piled up, the left plate of the scale began to sink heavily, emitting a brilliant golden light. The fragrance wafting from Junho's soul was so thick and beautiful, it could turn the cold mist of the afterlife into a warm spring breeze. Junho felt a strange sense of relief looking at his life piled on the scale. I didn't live in vain, after all. But in Ara's eyes, there was still deep sadness and regret. She pointed with a cold finger to the empty opposite, side the right plate of the scale. But look, Junho, it is so empty here. Your scale is bizarrely unbalanced. Your heart toward others filled the left, but on the right, the record of you loving yourself isn't even the weight of a speck of dust. This is evidence of your good deeds, but at the same time, it is proof of how cruelly you have neglected and abused yourself. Junho stood frozen. Ara's voice now pierced his spirit like a lash. You tried to be a lamp, lighting the path of others all your life, but the candle in your own room was melting down to the floor. When you gave up sleep to earn your sister's tuition, your body screamed. When you skipped lunch for your mother's medicine, your soul starved. Do you think saving others while failing to save yourself truly looks noble in the eyes of the divine? Ignoring the precious life that is yourself, that will be your given mission and your greatest regret. Junho bowed his head. Ara's words were like a dagger in the center of his chest. He believed that looking after others and supporting his family was the correct answer. It was the duty of the eldest son, and the only way for a poor young man to survive. But the life he saw here was just the residue of time, spent gnawing away at himself. Junho asked himself for the first time, was I ever truly happy as Lee Junho for even a single moment? There was no answer. Instead, only a sense of futility, like a cold wind leaking from the hole in his chest, was felt. What should I do? Am I to disappear here and remain only as a record? At Junho's question, Ara stepped down from her throne and warmly took his transparent hand. The goddess's touch was more intense and peaceful than any earthly warmth. No, the laws of the afterlife are strict, but the divine sometimes gives the most beautiful and pitiful souls a chance to return. Look at the tearful wishes of the people, trying to hold on to you from the living world. The clumsy love you gave is now becoming a rope to save you, reaching even here. Ara waved her hand in the air, and a large 3D screen appeared on one side of the corridor. It showed firefighters Jihun and Taejin, who had pulled Junho out of the hellish fire, and Minsek, covered in sweat and soot, pressing on Junho's chest inside the ambulance. It also showed his factory colleagues kneeling and crying out his name. Beyond the police line, their wailing traveling upstream against the flow of the Milky Way to wet Junho's feet. Junho, this is a judgment, and the last blessing I give you. Go back and learn how to love yourself first in this world. Only when you emit the fragrance of happiness can those you try to protect truly be happy in that scent. Your second life must not be the shoulders that carry others' burdens, but the lips that sing of your own joy. Do you understand? The moment Ara's solemn command was issued, the golden scales exploded into a brilliant light. The shards became butterflies and seeped into Junho's soul, and the Milky Way turned into a massive golden vortex, swallowing him. As the glass floor of the corridor shattered into pieces, Junho began to fall into a dazzling abyss of unknown depth. Ara's smiling voice echoed in his ears one last time. Go and bloom that brilliant flower you promised your soul. You are worthy, and the world is waiting for your return. Inside the falling Junho's heart, a single hot tear for himself flowed down for the first time. It wasn't a tear of regret, but a fierce longing for the life that would begin again, and an apology to himself. 9. The scream of a miracle and the pain of the flesh. A heart reignited. Go back. Go and bloom that brilliant flower you promised your soul. The moment Ara's final voice scattered like the resonance of the Milky Way, Junho's spirit plummeted into a dazzling abyss. It was less like falling and more like the speed of a shard, being pulled back to its place by a giant magnet. The brilliant white corridor of the afterlife instantly turned to darkness, and Junho's mind was crumpled back into a narrow, hot, and metallic space. Da! Ha! What tore through the silence wasn't a scream, but the first breath of life forced through the threshold of death. Inside the ambulance, the EKG monitor, which had cruelly signaled the end of Lee Junho with a flat line, suddenly began to draw waves steeper and sharper than a high mountain range. Beep, 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 beep. An irregular but intense noise filled the narrow vehicle. Cold oxygen rushed into Junho's stopped lungs like a raging wave, and the shriveled alveolar expanded with a tearing pain. The sensation Junho felt at that moment was not joy. It was an extreme pain closer to a curse. The process of the soul being forced back into the narrow, heavy prison of the flesh was a horrific tremor, as if tens of thousands of heated needles were piercing every nerve joint simultaneously. Every time the dawn air of Wonju touched his fire-burned skin, it felt as if salt were being rubbed into his body. And the bone fragments of his right arm, crushed by the gears, mercilessly stabbed at his muscles and nerves. From his throat, melted by toxic gases, black phlegm and the metallic taste of blood surged back. Pulse is back. Blood pressure is rising. Rosk return of spontaneous circulation achieved. Junho, can you hear me? Open your eyes. Grab my hand. Paramedic Minsek's voice struck Junho's ears like a thunderbolt. Minsek's face was a mess of sweat, tears, and black soot from the rescue. He shone a small light into Junho's pupils and desperately shook his shoulder with trembling hands. Junho managed to lift his eyelids heavy as led just a fraction. His vision was blurred and stained red. But through it, the cold white fluorescent light of the ambulance felt tens of thousands of times more beautiful than the light of the Milky Way where Ara had been. Yo, ooh, from Junho's cracked throat, a metallic rasp of a voice barely squeezed out. To utter those two words, Junho had to wring out every ounce of his soul's strength. The moment Minsek heard it, he almost collapsed by Junho's legs, his strength failing him. You're alive. You really lived. You pulled off this unbelievable miracle. Minsek tightly held Junho's only intact left hand and burst into tears like a child. Those tears wet Junho's hand, transmitting the warmth of the living world. The rookie firefighter Jihun, who was assisting, also let out a sigh of relief, placing a hand on his chest with bloodshot eyes. Outside the ambulance, hearing the urgent changes and Minsek's cheer, the colleagues' cheers and sobbing erupted simultaneously. Junho is breathing. Junho lived. The news spread through the scene faster than the fire, and the hellish Wonju Factory Fire site instantly turned into a festival of the wonders of life. Mr. Kim held on to the back door of the ambulance and shouted, Junho, you have to have a drink with me. Later, keep your promise. His shoulders shaking, inside the swaying ambulance, Junho stared blankly at the night landscape of Wonju passing by the window. Those cold stars he had seen through the eyes of a spirit were now warm lamps, welcoming him, sparkling as if within reach. Even the metallic taste of blood in his mouth felt as sweet as sugar water, as Junho savored every living heartbeat thumping in his chest with his whole body. The pain was still there. If anything, it was worse. But Junho embraced that pain willingly. Being able to feel pain was the clearest evidence that he was no longer a ghost, but a precious life standing on this earth once again. In his heart, he vowed to Ara and to all the hands that hadn't let go of him. Thank you for not giving up on me. This life that has started, again I will never waste it just for someone else. Like before, even if it hurts, Even if it's hard, I will breathe for my name, Lee. Junho, and I will smile for my own happiness. The ambulance glided into the Wonju Severance Hospital emergency room with its sirens blaring. The cold dawn air seeped deep into Junho's lungs once more. It wasn't the smoke of death, but the first scent of a second life beginning. 10. The flower that bloomed behind the flames. The miracle of Wonju. 1 year has passed since the hellish accident. The factory in Moonmark was rebuilt with state-of-the-art fire prevention equipment. But Junho is no longer there. Yet, people still talk about him. After a miraculous recovery, Junho transformed into a fire safety expert. He now travels to factories across Wonju and Gangwon, raising his voice to improve work environments and provide safety education for young people working in danger, just as he once did. The scars of the burns and the marks of the machine. Gears still remain on his right hand and shoulder. Some people turn their heads away when they see the scars. But Junho proudly shows them, calling them the medals of the second life. On his days off, he now walks along Wonju Stream with his mother and searches for good restaurants with his sibling, enjoying small moments of happiness. The one thing I learned in the afterlife is this: a good deed from someone who doesn't love themselves is just a castle built on sand. Hope shines in the eyes of those who hear Junho's story. He has become closer than real brothers with Taejin and Jihun, who saved him during the accident. Every year on the anniversary of the fire, the three of them share drinks in the Wonju market, laughing and celebrating the brilliance of being alive. The Wonju Factory Fire left 350 million won in property damage. But upon those ashes, the most beautiful flower named Lee Junho bloomed. People around him now call him the miracle of Wonju, but Junho simply introduces himself as the person who lives most happily today, taking powerful steps forward to share the miracle he received with the world.